Good morning. Welcome to the Home Affairs Select Committee. This morning we're looking into the asylum decision-making process and conversions to Christianity. The aims for this session are to look at the extent conversion to Christianity is grounds for granting asylum or granting an appeal in the United Kingdom, and how statutory guidance is used in this process, how the genuineness of conversion to Christianity is assessed within the asylum decision-making system, how lawyers can challenge a Home Office refusal to grant leave to remain in the United Kingdom within the context of conversion to Christianity, and how church leaders and clergy assess and support asylum seekers who wish to convert to Christianity, including the policies and guidance they have in place with regard to conversion. So we have three panels this morning. A very warm welcome to our first panel, the Reverend Rev'd Firth from the Free Church of England, and formerly the priest at St Cuthbert's in Darlington.
That's right. Good morning.
We're very grateful for your time this
Thank
morning. We noted the comments that you've made about conversion to Christianity for asylum seekers. We've read the interview you gave to the Telegraph. Just to start us off, could you just explain, you were a clergy within the Church of England, but you've left the Church of England now.
That's right, yes.
Right, and you were the clergy at St Cuthbert's between 2018 and 2020.
That's right.
So your experiences that you gave the interview about relate to that period for 2 years then?
Yes.
Okay, they're not in relation to your work now?
No, and so I'm just giving oral evidence in relation to that sort of personal experience from that context, and also wider knowledge and insight as well.
Right. Do you want to just set out for us then, when you were at St Cuthbert's for 2 years, the support that your church was offering to asylum seekers? If you could just set out for us what the church was doing.
Yes, well, thank you for inviting me, and good morning to the committee. I'd just like, firstly, to just quickly say that as I've been preparing for this select committee and speaking with wise counsel, unfortunately, that wise counsel has said, Matthew, as a result of the evidence that you might give today, people might try to get you. And I just want to say that that's a sad state of affairs where people feel slightly intimidated by giving such evidence on a topic like this. So I shall report back to the Select Committee if I should get any comeback in those terms.
Please do, and we will take that very seriously.
Yes,
you're coming here to give evidence to us in good faith to explain your experience.
Absolutely. And then very briefly, before I get on to answering that question, in a way it's sad that we have to meet, because baptism and conversion is a joyful thing. When people are incorporated into Christ, that's a joyful thing. And so it's sad that in some ways baptism has been brought into disrepute by certain behaviours. That said, I shall now address the question that you directly put. The parish in Darlington was offering all sorts of welcome to people who are asylum seekers. And that extended to, for instance, I was using my garage as a bit of a furniture distribution centre for people who had been housed in the local area, and so I was working a little bit with some people who were working with Darlington Action for Refugees who said, could we use your garage as a furniture store to distribute to people who were being kind of rehoused. And I was very happy to do that. The congregation members were very good at befriending and supporting, in a pastoral sense, people who were asylum seekers. And I think congregation members tried to engage those people in ways which drew them into the life of the church community, whether that was social or sort of worship services or kind of teaching programs. So that was the kind of support that was happening in the parish, but also there was wider support in Darlington itself as well, through secular organisations.
And that's quite normal, isn't it, for churches to reach out, because often asylum seekers are in areas, obviously don't know people, but the church is often there for the stranger. So
yes, I mean that's a fundamental thing. We have to be as welcoming as possible to people who find themselves in difficult circumstances.
So just explain then your concerns about what happened in those 2 years you were there.
So when I arrived, what I found was kind of in the system. I mean, there was no formal booking system, so to speak, but in the system there were quite a surprising number of baptisms which were kind of going forward in terms of the baptism system that was there. And it was a large number of young male asylum seekers, almost in a cohort. And so obviously when baptisms are already in the system and you arrive as a new incumbent, you honour those baptisms because it's not an honourable thing to do suddenly to cancel things. But then I started sort of looking into it a bit further, and after those baptisms, week in, week out, significant groups of mainly Iranian and Syrian young male asylum seekers were being brought to me in sizable cohorts.
What numbers? How big?
At a time, sort of, 6 or 7 people brought to me by, people saying that these need baptism, these people need baptism. And you start to spot...
Madam Chair, sorry, when you say they were brought to you,
yes.
who was doing the bringing?
Well, there was a particular individual who I think had received right to remain in the UK through the asylum application system, but I think this particular individual didn't want baptism, but was bringing lots of other people who this individual said these need to be baptised.
So this person was potentially an asylum seeker themselves beforehand?
Yes, well, I think that person had sought asylum and had received right to remain in the UK, but they themselves weren't requesting baptism. They were bringing groups who were said to be wanting baptism.
Sorry, Marco, can I just conclude?
Yeah.
I just want to be clear, you said 6 or 7 people.
How often?
At a time. So how often was this happening? Every week, 6 or 7?
It would be sort of, every 2-3 weeks you'd get sort of that number of people being...
The same people being brought back or different people?
Well, different people.
Right, so over a 2-year period, you're saying 6 or 7 people were being brought every week?
In batches. Every 2 or 3 weeks there would be a batch of 6 people, that sort of number, brought to me, yeah.
Right, and did you, from looking at the information we've had available to the committee, the number of baptisms that took place in your church during the period you were there were, I think, 15 that could be put to or could be referred to as asylum seekers.
Yeah, well,
so this doesn't quite tally if you're saying 6 or 7 every couple of weeks, but the baptisms are only 15 over that 2-year period.
And that's because I pressed a pause button on the process. So there is a discrepancy. Well, it's not a discrepancy. It's a difference between the number of people that were being brought to me to request baptism and the actual number of baptisms that happened. And so, as I said, both in the interview I gave with the Telegraph and just a moment ago, I honoured the baptisms that were the baptism requests that were already in the system. But then you spot a pattern, and then you think, hang on, there's something going on here, and then you try to press a pause button, which is to make sure that people are requested to come to church and start getting involved and attending church regularly, events and so on, and that was the thing that kind of made the numbers fall off a cliff in a sense, because those people kind of melted away. Really, they weren't really wanting to get involved with the life of the church so much after I sort of requested them to do so.
Actually, I've just been looked at this again. So it was a total of 15 people. Over the past 10 years, 13 adults, 2 infants who may have been asylum seekers. So that was over a 10-year period. It wasn't just
I think, I wouldn't know those figures because you'd have to look in the parish registers, and I don't have access to those. But all I know is that when I arrived, there were a number, sort of handful of people already in the system, which I honoured. But then you spot a pattern, and then you think something has to be done about.
So you basically stopped baptising any asylum seekers?
No. None happened after that period of time. It's not that I said I'm not going to baptise you. It's that I made sure that the process for taking those applications forward was rigorous, and that caused people to sort of melt away.
I'm sure we'll have some questions about what that actually meant, what the rigorous process was that you introduced. I'm going to move to Tim Lawton.
Thank you, Chair. Rev'd Firth, since your interview and your comments, it's probably fair to say that the Church of England has come down on you like the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah.
And the quote from the Bishop of Durham, who was the official spokesperson in response to your interview, he said, "We robustly reject all the allegations being made by Matthew Firth, who resigned from his role at St Cuthbert's in 2020, for which he's provided no evidence. At no time did he raise concerns locally or with senior clergy about the number of asylum seekers being baptised at the church, and produces no evidence of being bullied by local church members in relation to this matter." Why have they come down on you in such quite a heavy way, do you think?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, no allegations have been made by myself about either the bishop, the diocese, the church or anything. I was simply describing what I saw. If the eyewitness testimony of a priest isn't evidence, then in a sense I don't know what sort of evidence they're wanting. It is quite interesting that rather than just calmly and sort of and in a business-like way dealing with the eyewitness testimony that I put forward and the experience that I recounted, instead of doing that, there were a number of sort of veiled attacks in the press, writing it off as nonsense. In a letter to the Telegraph, I think the former Bishop of Durham said that Mr. Firth has presented an imaginative range of allegations. Well, they're not imaginary. You know, it's what I saw and I had to deal with at the time. I think one of the reflexes of any large organisation can be when something is raised like this to kind of go on a bit of an attempt to sort of deny things and sort of have a go at the so-called whistleblower. And I think that certainly that the Church of England and other organisations have been through a journey where they've learned to sort of assess things in a more kind of level-headed sort of way. For instance, like safeguarding, for instance, 20, 30 years ago, there was almost a reflex to sort of, no, it's not happening, and maybe have a go at the whistleblowers. Now, most large institutions have learned not to do that and to deal with things in a business-like way. So it's unfortunate that in this case, it's almost been a relapse back into that reflex action to have a go at me in the press, and on social media. So.
Is it a fair criticism to say that if you were genuinely concerned about a genuine problem at the time, if you've told us you asked, to the extent that you pressed the pause button, why wouldn't you have reported it up the management chain?
There are two reasons. Number one, I dealt with the situation. I personally dealt with it. Number two, I had experience in that particular diocese of reporting quite serious things that were going on in various ways, various spheres. Well, to do with bullying and my experience was that those disclosures were just sort of ignored and sort of poo-pooed, really. And so there wasn't much confidence that I could have shared something like that and been taken very seriously. And I think, in a sense, we've seen over the past few weeks that when I have raised this matter sort of more publicly, the response that we got from the Church of England was, again, it was just denying, rubbishing, having a go at the whistleblower. And so that was the culture that I experienced. But I think the main thing was that I observed a situation when I came in as incumbent, and I dealt with it. And I think I was aware that there was enough awareness among senior staff of the kind of dynamics that were going on in parishes, such that if I'd have reported on that particular local situation, it wouldn't have been news.
So you're saying that this was fairly common knowledge amongst other parishes, and certainly amongst the bishop in the diocese in which your parish
There was a letter in the Daily Telegraph in response to all this from a parish priest who's now in London, who, when he was a curate on the South Coast in 1999, said that, oh yes, this sort of dynamic was happening there as well. So clergy that I speak to and who have contacted me since I was public about my experience have said, oh yes, we're aware that this kind of dynamic is happening. So I think that's my answer.
Okay, just to come back to what actually happened with you. You said, I think you used the phrase that when you said, sorry, there's a pause on baptisms here, and they melted away. Where did they go? And presumably these were people, somebody suggested a sort of fixer, for want of a better word, was bringing cohorts of people to you saying they need baptism, who you'd not seen before, had not been regular attendees at the church before, and then when you said no, effectively never saw again. And
well,
what happened to them?
So I didn't quite say no. So I just made sure that rather than it being a sort of a quick process, that those people realised that they had to get involved in the life of the church, come to our events, come to our social events, help out in different ways, and when that sort of understanding was put forward in terms of being involved in the life of the church, people would, fairly quickly sort of stop coming to that morning service, and I don't really know where they went or what happened after that, because they weren't coming along to church after that.
So they tried to find a soft touch elsewhere, as far as you.
I have no idea what
do you think? Final question. What do you think would be a fair assessment of somebody who is absolutely genuine, who presents at church, and then after a while says, "Look, actually, I want to take this further, and I'd like to be baptised into the Church of England." How would you, if you were setting up that sort of scheme to say, that person's genuine? How would you?
Well, I think firstly, we need to take the story slightly further back to where that particular person may have come from. So if somebody, for instance, is part of a church community in Iran or Syria, or they've been baptised in Iran or Syria, then that should carry a lot of weight in terms of the sort of like a genuine assessment of this person's Christian faith, because it's a brave person who would be part of a church community over there and also be baptised over there. So when that particular person's, if you come into contact with a person like that, then there's a great deal of confidence there. Secondly, if somebody is in, say, Iran or Syria and they want to convert to Christianity, but they're afraid to do so in their home country, when they arrive in the UK, they are coming to a very free country with religious freedom and tolerance of worship and so on. So if that person were to request baptism pretty quickly, having come to the UK, or request to join a church pretty quickly after having come to the UK, then that also would carry a lot of weight. But what I spotted was that the vast majority, if not all, of the people seeking asylum who were coming to me for baptism were seeking baptism after already having failed in their initial asylum claim. And so again, that's a pattern which should be spotted, and perhaps should be part of advice and guidance to clergy on how to discerningly deal with these situations. If you're receiving baptism requests and they're more or less solely from people who have already failed in their initial asylum claims, then something's going on there, and therefore I would be far more careful about that particular baptism request, as indeed I was, which is why I spotted that dynamic going on, and I tried to press pause in a reasonable way to make sure that I was behaving in a discerning and kind of wise manner in relation to those requests.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, was there a whistleblowing policy when you were the vicar at St. Cuthbert's?
I don't know whether there was an official policy or anything like that. I can't remember seeing anything like a whistleblowing policy. But again, it was something that I dealt with at a local level. In fact, in the Church of England statements, they did say that it was for me to deal with, and I dealt with it.
Okay. Yeah. Mark Olongi.
Thank you very much, and at the risk of being slightly patronising, can I just say I think you're a brave man, and I want to thank you for being here today. I'd like to try and investigate a little bit further and explore a little bit further that point at which there's that tipping point between assessing the veracity of a person's application to join the Christian faith. You've already elaborated on it a little bit. Could you tell me what it would mean to you, even if someone had actually already failed their application process? Because I'm sure your pattern of thinking would be, well, why not apply immediately when you arrive rather than make an asylum application? You know, why wouldn't you do that? So, what would it be for you? Because it seems to me, as this is something that is based on the perception of an individual, and therefore very subjective.
Right, and that's the difficulty. I think we're dealing with, on the one hand, we're dealing with individuals, and then on the other hand, you're dealing with dynamics, as I've described, in terms of the dynamic of cohorts of people coming. But the reality is each baptism request is from an individual, so the question is a pertinent one. How do you assess the kind of veracity of that particular person? And I think, there's a sense of, having been around the block a few times in terms of pastoral work, you do have there's some intuition involved. But there's also a sense of, is this person seeking to get involved in the community life of the church? Is this person seeking to get involved in the worshipping life of the church? Is the person seeking to get involved in some of the outreach life of the church? So really it's about that person's it's almost about that person's spirituality or that person's expression of their faith, rather than a particular event which is called baptism and a particular document which is called a baptism certificate. So I think in all of this, we should be looking more about or looking more at a person's kind of a rounded picture of a person's kind of Christian expression or Christian exploration or Christian discipleship, rather than focusing on applications, baptism certificates. Because those things can just happen, they're events, whereas a rounded Christian experience and Christian life is more of an organic picture. And so that's the kind of discerning assessment I would try to look at in terms of individuals that were coming to me.
Of the population that you served in Darlington, did you already, because I don't know Darlington, does it already have a Muslim population?
There's not a very significant Muslim population, apart from when you start looking at the figures of asylum seekers who are placed in Darlington while their claims are being processed. I'm not exactly au fait with precisely how that system works, but I believe that when people apply for asylum, they can be placed in certain areas, and I think Darlington seemed to be one of those places where there was a significant proportion of asylum seekers. So therefore, you would start to get more of a population of people who are Muslims.
Let me ask the question perhaps in a slightly different way then. Mm-hmm. Based on your knowledge of the population that you had at the time, and based on your knowledge in talking to your own peers, colleagues, in your own church and perhaps wider clergy, are you aware of any Muslims who are already in the country who are seeking to convert?
Any Muslims who are already in the country? Yes, I mean so they could be two categories. There are Muslims in the UK who have been here for a long time, or then maybe second, third generation Muslims who are seeking to convert to Christianity.
Are they coming in batches and sixes?